The nature of work in America is changing, due in part to the growing number of gig workers.
Oh, I do all of them. I do the dog walking, the food delivery, the scooter charging.
What led you to the gig economy and gig jobs?
It just fit with my lifestyle. I didn't want to sit at a desk all day. You got to choose your own hours, and you have a lot of freedom, I guess. It's kind of like playing a video game. You look on your phone, and you're like, complete this mission, and you just do it, and you get rewarded with a couple bucks.
And what are your thoughts on people that work gig jobs full time?
Oh, that is just such a struggle. That they are hustling all day, and you don't get any benefits or anything like that. So if you're doing it full time, yeah, you are working for every dollar. That is for sure. Yeah.
For most people, jobs like app-based deliveries or rideshare driving are a side gig. But for a growing number of people, these jobs have become full-time work without the labor protections and employee benefits. And that's turned the gig economy into a new kind of election issue.
While the term gig economy might be new, the concept isn't. Americans have always worked odd jobs, but the number of people participating in it has increased, driven in part by advanced technology and wage stagnation. But this part of the economy is so new that the federal government can't even track it all, which makes official numbers hard to come by. The biggest attraction to it is the freedom and flexibility of being able to create your own schedule, which gig workers overwhelmingly say is necessary to keep costs low for employers. And you'll hear the same from the employers and from lawmakers who want to keep these industries light on restrictions, which saves the companies money and avoids a lot of red tape. That's also the view of the Trump administration, whose Labor Department recently said it considers gig workers to be independent contractors. That's because these workers are allowed to set their own schedule and even work for competing companies. But this also leaves them ineligible for things like overtime pay, workers' compensation, and benefits. And most gig workers want that to change. We partnered with Ipsos to get a better read on that and found that most Americans believe gig workers should be afforded the same labor protections as full-time employees. Support for that among gig workers is even higher. And that could be because a growing number of them are working gigs full-time. The most recent data from the Fed shows that 18% of American gig workers rely on their gigs as their primary source of income. That's compared to just 16% over a year ago. The data also shows that compared to full-time employees, full-time gig workers experience far greater economic instability. While the Trump administration is keen on considering gig workers as independent contractors, several Democratic candidates for president feel differently, like Senator Bernie Sanders. In 2018, he reintroduced the Workplace Democracy Act, which makes it tougher for companies to label their workers as independent contractors rather than full-time employees. Several other Democratic senators running for president co-signed the proposal, and now the issue is coming up on the campaign trail.
You look at things like Uber, which really disempowers workers because they don't admit that their workers are workers.
Whether it's unemployment insurance, whether it's minimum wage protections, whether it's the ability to earn overtime, there's been a series of benefits and protections that have built up over the course of the 20th century that you only can access if you're an employee. So figuring out what that definition is in terms of who is an employee versus who is an independent contractor is a very, very important consideration.
Unlike most full-time workers, people working full-time in the gig economy are solely responsible for paying for health care, saving for retirement, or dealing with an injury that takes them out of their job. That can be a struggle, especially as some of these jobs have gotten less lucrative. For example, Uber once claimed its drivers in major U.S. cities were making between $70,000 to $90,000 a year. But recent data show average hourly wages for rideshare drivers are much lower, and companies are taking a bigger cut. We reached out to Uber, and they responded with this statement, saying, "We believe we can improve the quality and the security of independent work while preserving the flexibility independent workers value." Across rideshare companies, Some drivers who jumped into this work full-time just a couple years ago have seen their income shrink in the time since.
I was transportation for a car dealer. They had me to a point where I was working less than 40 hours. And at that time, just like a lot of my customers and people were talking about, with Uber you can do this, and Lyft you can do this much money, and you can do it on your own time, schedule. And that's kind of how I got started. And I realized it was something where I was, definitely making more.
Do you know why they decided to cut the share that the drivers make?
Uber and Lyft, they're both trying to find ways to be profitable, but it's been tough, as seen in the news, is they haven't been profitable as far as the stocks and IPOs go. So they trickle that down onto the drivers. It's become like way more dire at this point, where you have to have some type of exit strategy if you're doing this full time now. This is not surprisingly pretty close to my house. You can start here and essentially go anywhere. Been a full-time rideshare driver, I'd say, for about 2.5 years. Yeah.
So there's a pretty big debate over how we should classify full-time gig workers. Do you think that we should classify them as full-time employees, where they can then be able to obtain benefits and certain other labor protections? Or do you think full-time gig workers should simply be considered independent contractors?
Because of the gig economy and the way it works, it's possible that they may never, or it may be tough for them to enact the same exact, benefits that are with a full-time employee. But if there's some type of middle ground where they can get those things, but then still have some of the nuances of independent work or gig work, then that would probably help people as well.
It's going to be an important part of the labor market. I don't think the gig economy is going away anytime soon, but I think it is highlighting some very important trends that policymakers and employers need to take into consideration as we think about how to make work better for more people.